Hello and welcome everyone this morning, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar on funding opportunities for tourism and hospitality businesses. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Patricia Kingston from Tourism NI, and this is one of our, well, the first webinar of the week and first funding session that we've had so far this year. So we've plenty of people on board this morning, and we're delighted to have you all with us. We'll shortly be hearing from my colleague Lesley Ann O'Donnell from Tourism NI. He'll be followed by Aileen McShane and Emer McGee from PKF-FPM. So a whole host of experts for us here this morning. They'll be also staying online to answer some of your questions at the end. So be sure to stick around for that. And if you have some questions that maybe you haven't submitted in advance of today, feel free to pop those into the chat during the session. We're delighted we'll also be once again offering a limited number of short one-to-one calls with our experts for any NI-based tourism and hospitality industry registered to attend the session. So I'll be explaining a little bit more about that later on. The webinar is being delivered as part of Tourism NI's ongoing Tourism Enterprise Development Programme, and this year's programme has been designed to continue to help the tourism industry here survive and recover from really what's been an unprecedented year. So we're here to do what we can. We're continually reviewing and evolving the programme based on your needs. So do keep letting us know what topics you'd like to see in future. And as always, you'll be receiving an evaluation link following today's session. Do be sure to fill that in, and then we know what you need and we can keep tailoring the programme for you. Alongside the TED webinars, you can also access a whole range of support materials on tourismni.com and covid19.tourismni.com. So again, we'll talk to you about that a little bit more later on. Hope you all find today's session useful and informative, and I'll be back at the end to ask our experts some of your questions. So now, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Lesley Ann O'Donnell from Tourism NI to get us started with the main presentation.
I'm just going to take you through some of the details around the Certified Bed and Breakfast Guest House and Guest Accommodation Support Scheme that launched last Thursday. All of the details for the programme for the scheme are available on the Tourism NI COVID Hub. The link is up there, but if you go through to our standard corporate website, tourismni.com, you'll be able to navigate your way through from there. So an overview of the scheme, it's a 4.1 million support initiative, and it was part of the package of funding that was announced by Conor Murphy on the 23rd of November. It's administered by ourselves at Tourism NI on behalf of the Department for Economy, and it is with the purpose to provide direct financial contribution to support businesses in these categories for their continuity plans and help position them for continued operating through 2021. The scheme closes next Thursday, the 11th of February at 5 p.m. And at that point, the application forms will be closed. The businesses that fall under this sector were successful and sustainable in the past, but are now in a vulnerable position because of a loss in revenue and a sharp decrease in consumer demand, particularly over the summer periods, where there was a reduction in kind of consumer confidence in using this type of accommodation. So the scheme itself there are 8 categories of accommodation under the tourism order, and we were asked by the executive to deliver a scheme to provide support specifically for these 3 categories. So it's bed and breakfast, guest house and guest accommodation, and that is for businesses that are certified by Tourism NI under these categories. Other categories like hotels, self-catering, hostels, bunkhouses and campus accommodation are not currently eligible under this scheme, although we're very aware that 2021 is going to be another challenging year for tourism providers, and we're working closely with the department and government officials to constantly monitor that, and we'll assess that position as we move forward. We know that most of the self-catering sector had a more positive summer than some other sectors because there was slightly more consumer confidence in using that type of self-contained accommodation. We're also aware that the localised restriction support scheme is available to the self-catering categories, and I know Emer and Aileen will kind of go into that in a bit more detail. The other sector that we're conscious of as well is hostels and bunkhouses. They had quite a reduction in demand over the summer periods because of the shared nature of their accommodation, and that there are few in that category that have maybe fallen through in the grant support schemes between LRSS and some of the earlier schemes. So again, we're just continually monitoring that situation with government officials to see how these businesses might be assisted. So the support under this scheme can be used for some of the following areas: the cost of reopening, keeping your business operational, adapting areas within the business to kind of meet COVID-19 regulations, reconnecting with employees and customers, adapting your marketing or even financial planning to kind of keep your business operational. The financial support packages themselves will be in the range of $1,000 to $12,500, and that's based on room numbers and turnover. So what we're looking for is the number of rooms that are certified against these properties, and it has to match the number of rooms that are on your certification received from Tourism Northern Ireland, and then a percentage of annual turnover from 2019. The grants will be paid by bank transfer into the application forms once those are processed and approved. So on the eligibility criteria, as a tourist accommodation provider, you need to be in compliance with the tourism order. And what that means is that you hold a valid certificate from Tourism Northern Ireland in one of the three categories, and that you were open or operational from the 23rd of March 2020. The business was viable prior to COVID-19, and that you've taken all kind of reasonable steps to safeguard that viability and intention to operate and continue operating the business from 2021 onwards. That the business has a listing on discovernorthernireland.com. Now, we know that not everybody has a listing on there, so we will accept links to other websites or online booking platforms that demonstrate that the business is operational. So businesses also need to be compliant with other statutory body regulations, and that's things like your food safety standards, fire regulations, and all of those regulations that you're required to operate on. That the business is fully tax compliant, it's not the subject of insolvency or winding up proceedings, and that they declare any support received under previous grant schemes as well. So in terms of the information required to complete the application, it's your property and contact information, a proof of ID, a copy of your current certificate that is received from Tourism Northern Ireland. Now, those should be displayed on premises, so hopefully they're easily accessible for anybody hoping to operate the scheme. But if not, you can get in touch with us at Tourism Northern Ireland and we'll help get a copy of that across to you. A pointer to your online kind of profile or listing for the business, your company registration number, a bank account details and a recent bank statement, your unique taxpayer reference that should be found on any kind of returns to HMRC or self-assessment forms, land and property services ID, the application form completed in full, which you can link to from the Tourism NI websites, and once you complete that application form, you'll be asked to complete a declaration that validates all of the information provided in your form. That is me. I am going to pass over to Aoibhinn and Emer to take you through some of the other areas of support that might be accessible to your businesses.
Many thanks for joining this webinar on government support. So I'm Aoibhinn McShane, and I'm a senior manager within the business advisory team at PKF-FPM Accountants. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Emer McGee and Ruth Emery. So Emer is a manager within our business advisory team and is actively supporting businesses in the tourism sector, ensuring that they're securing all available supports. So Emer will join me today in going through the various supports that are available with a specific focus on the tourism and hospitality sector. Ruth Emery is a senior manager within our tax team heading up cross-border payroll. And Ruth, who is acutely aware of all things furlough, will join us at the end for the Q&A session. So we anticipate that our presentation will last for about 30 minutes with time at the end then for your questions. At the outset, look, we're very much aware that this is such a challenging time for you all, and we do hope that this webinar will support in some way. So to get started then, I'm going to hand you over to Emer, who's going to take you through some of the supports.
Thanks, Aoibhinn. So we're going to start off this morning with the job retention scheme. Now, obviously, at this stage, most businesses are quite well acquainted with the standard process behind claiming furlough, so I won't spend too much time discussing that, but the purpose of this slide really is just to bring to your attention some of the most recent changes to the job retention scheme and the compliance aspect of it as well. So back in November, the government released their third iteration of the JRS, and some key changes that came out of that were the extension of the scheme to the 30th of April 2021, and the fact that employees are required to be on the payroll before the 30th of October 2020 to qualify. Previously, they had to be on the payroll before March 2020, so this new eligibility criteria really opens the scheme up to a wider pool of people. The changes also involve the removal of any tapering and the fact that employees or employers didn't have to have previously registered for furlough to be eligible for it now. So those were quite welcome changes at the time. In terms of compliance around the job retention scheme, we have been aware that HMRC began their compliance checks towards the end of last year. They mainly took the form of letters being sent out to businesses requesting some compliance information. And since we came back in the new year, we've heard of a few more businesses receiving those letters. So first and foremost, I would say that if you do receive one of these letters, don't panic or presume that you've done something wrong. Quite often, it seems that HMRC are just doing random checks on businesses to make sure that they're compliant with the scheme. In other instances, they are aware of maybe inconsistencies between the business's PAYE submissions and the submissions for the JRS, and that's flagging the business, and that's why they've been why a request has gone out for some compliance information. So don't panic. In order to comply with HMRC's regulations, you're required to hold the information for at least 5 years. And businesses who receive these letters are receiving standard information requests such as employee names and national insurance numbers, the furlough start and end date for each employee, and signed declarations or pay slips which evidence the employee's salary before COVID-19. As well as that, they're also looking for the calculations that were prepared in the furlough submission. If you suspect that you've made an error, the advice is honesty is the best policy, and just to make a voluntary disclosure to HMRC. They are being quite understanding in the sense that mistakes happen, and if you declare an error within 90 days, there shouldn't be a penalty. So yeah, just be proactive in those instances, and hopefully you should reach a good resolution. In terms then of the job retention bonus scheme, this was first announced last July, and whenever the JRS was extended until April, the bonus scheme was deferred, and that was the government's official wording around that was deferred. So hopefully the bonus scheme will happen sometime in the future. It will result in a £1,000 payment for each member of staff who is retained. So again, just underscoring the importance of retaining your information in case the scheme does start up again and you're entitled to those bonuses. So then moving on to employee sick pay. You're probably aware that you're entitled to claim back your statutory sick pay, which has been paid out to employees who are off with coronavirus. Since this was first announced, though, the government have expanded those who it applies to, which is good. So it also applies to anyone who is off for a period of up to 2 weeks due to receiving a shielding letter or due to receiving a self-isolation notice from the Public Health Authority. So if you have any employees who fall into that category, you can reclaim their statutory sick pay from the government for up to 2 weeks. And again, just retention of supporting documentation has been requested by HMRC of at least 3 years. So then moving on to the self-employment income support scheme. As you'll know, the first 2 grants for this have been issued, and the closing date for the applications for the 3rd grant has now passed. So really it's the 4th grant that we're concerned with here, and it will cover the period of February 2021 until April 2021. At the minute, there still aren't a lot of details around the amount, the application dates and the eligibility for this 4th grant. It's expected that this will be announced on the 3rd of March 21, which is the date of the government's budget announcement. So it will probably coincide with that. But there has been some speculation that the new eligibility may consider 2019-2020 tax returns, compliance around those and the amounts provided on those tax returns. So our advice there would just be, if that is the case, to make sure that you're submitting your tax return on a timely basis to make sure that you qualify if that is considered whenever it comes to the 4th grant. And then moving on to the newly self-employed support scheme. So this scheme was announced back in December, and at the time it was very welcome because until that point, the newly self-employed had really struggled to secure support and financial support. So it was announced in December and was to close in January, but this has now been extended until the 5th of February. The reason being that they wanted to give the newly self-employed the opportunity to include information from their most recent tax returns. So it comprises of a one-off taxable grant of £3,500. And in terms of the eligibility there, it's quite specific in terms of when the individual had to commence trading as a self-employed individual. So between the 6th of April 2019 and the 5th of April 2020. The business also has to have been adversely impacted by COVID-19, and the trading profits have to be below £50,000. Originally, the criteria also stated that the individual's income from their self-employment had to be at least 50% of their overall income, but that was quite a difficult threshold for the newly self-employed to meet if they had come from full-time salaried permanent work before. So this requirement has been lifted for individuals who find themselves in that category. And then moving on to the Limited Company Director Support Scheme. This is a new scheme which was announced in January. Initially, the amount of the grant was announced as £1,000, but that's actually been increased now to £3,500, which is excellent news for anyone who qualifies. One of the most common questions we've been asked around the limited company director grant is whether somebody who holds directorships in multiple companies can claim the grant multiple times. Unfortunately, no, that's not the case. It would be one grant per individual, irrespective of how many directorships they hold. The eligibility for this scheme is quite detailed. There are quite a few criteria that you have to meet. The main ones would be that you have to be a person with significant control, so holding over 25% of the share capital within a company. You must have been paid remuneration through the company of at least £4,375, and your remuneration during the 2020 year must have been 40% lower as a result of COVID-19. So Invest NI have set up an eligibility checker, which you can use to see whether you're eligible first and foremost, and then progress to the application stage. That's quite a helpful tool, and it can be found on their website. And the applications for this particular scheme close on the 18th of February 2021. Next then is the Wet Pubs Business Support Scheme. So this is specifically for wet pubs who were required to close for the 12-week period between the 4th of July 2020 and the 23rd of September 2020. And it comprises of a one-off payment that covers each full week that the pub was closed during that period between July and September. So in order to be eligible for this one, the business has to have been named within the Health Protection Regulations 2020. So those regulations will have stated at certain times wet pubs had to close. So that's an important factor to consider. And as well as that, the business has to have been eligible for the Localised Restriction Support Scheme. We're coming onto that scheme shortly, and Avine's going to explain that one. And the business also has to have been closed for at least one full week during the specified period. And businesses must have been actively trading before they were forced to close due to COVID-19. So one of the most common questions we've been asked so far around this scheme is whether a business that comprises of a wet pub and perhaps also an off licence on site which continue to trade is eligible for this. And the answer is yes. Certainly if the wet pub element of the business closed, then you're eligible for this, irrespective of whether the off licence continue to trade at the same time. But there are also some specific exclusions for this particular support. So exclusions include any business that operated at a reduced capacity. So for instance, if the business opened a beer garden, in that sense, they still continue to trade, so they wouldn't qualify for the wet pub support. Or as well, if a business failed to comply with a COVID-19 prohibition notice or is dormant or undergoing insolvency proceedings, they wouldn't qualify for this support. So there's no need to apply for this particular one. The Department for the Economy has partnered with Land and Property Services to identify any eligible businesses, and they contact via email for this. Once they do contact eligible businesses with the application form, they must be returned and completed and returned within 5 days. And if you think that you were entitled to the scheme but haven't received an email, then our advice would be to contact the email address provided there. They had asked that those sort of people reach out by the end of January. So if you are in the unlikely situation that you find yourself left out of this scheme, then do contact with urgency there. One of the most common reasons for people not receiving the email was that back whenever they submitted their localised restriction support scheme form, they designated themselves as serving food, and therefore they were ruled out of this scheme because they were it was decided they weren't a wet pub. So it would be a case of proving that you are in that instance. Whenever you receive an application form, the information that the Department for the Economy require is evidence that you were open or closed at the specified times. So you would be required to provide bank statements to evidence that, and they also require some declarations around the validity of your claim as well. So I'm going to pass back over to Avine again, who is going to discuss the next few schemes.
Great, thanks very much for that, Emer. So now I will look at the Localised Restrictions Support Scheme, or the LRSS as it is often referred to. So what is it? The Localised Restriction Support Scheme, it provides financial support to certain businesses which have been required to close or severely limit their operations under the health regulations put in place by the Northern Ireland Executive. So given the severity of the COVID pandemic, the regulations have been updated on numerous occasions to extend the types of businesses which had to close or severely limit operations, and also to reinstate support. So we're now at phase 5 of the scheme, and this phase covers the period the 26th of December 2020 to the 5th of February 21. So that's a period of 6 weeks. As I'm sure you are aware, there are a full list of businesses who were forced to close during the phase 5, and these were included within these regulations from the executive. And this link, can be made available to anyone who isn't sure where to find it. Most notably for the tourism and hospitality sector, included on the list are the B&Bs, hotels, self-catering establishments, guest house, and the outdoor visitor attractions, etc. Just to make you aware, the guidance does note exclusions in respect of availing of the support, and these exclusions include outdoor areas of stately and historic homes or outdoor areas of castles. Equally, in terms of exclusions, regarding to having to severely limit operations, it's important to note that this does not include instances whereby people are off sick due to COVID, which has caused the business to have to severely limit operations. The guidance does stipulate that you can only get this support if you've been instructed to close or severely limit your operations under the health regulations. So I just wanted to make sure and get that point across. I suppose the most important aspect in terms of being able to avail of the localised restriction scheme is that businesses must occupy business premises. This localised support, it's not available to businesses which do not occupy business premises, i.e. those that operate from home or offer like a mobile service, or who even rent a space, say, within a premises. So say, for example, you know, you're renting a space from a hotel to carry out like a kids activity club or something like that. This wouldn't be deemed eligible for support under the localised restriction support scheme. In terms of then how the department verify business premises, generally the valuation of the property for rates purposes is used. There are exceptions to this, whereby hotels, hostels, guest houses, you know, self-catering establishments and B&Bs, these types of businesses can still avail if valued as a domestic property, but you need to have certification from TNI under, you know, one of their orders. I think it's the Tourism Order of 1992. So in terms of this support, what does it cover then? There are 3 levels of support available for businesses who are eligible and whose application is successful. The level of support is based on the net annual value, the NAV of the property from which the business operates. So the lower rate, which is £800 per week for every week of the restrictions, this rate is applicable to sole occupants operating from a property with an NAV that is a net annual value of £15,000 or less. In addition, the £800 per week applies to the guest houses, the B&Ps, the ones that are valued as domestic properties and have that certification from TNI. In addition, this rate also applies to a business that is an occupier of part of a property which is restricted. So if there is only one NAV for the property but 2 or more businesses operate from it, the support is limited to £800 regardless of the NAV of the whole property itself. And then the standard rate is £1,200 per week for each week of the restrictions. Again, you need to be a sole occupant of the property with an NAV between £15,001 and £51,000, and then the higher rate is £1,600 per week for every week of the restrictions. Again, a sole occupant of a property with an NAV of £51,000 or more. So really, this scheme is designed to support the occupying business in a property, not the landlord or the letting agent. If you don't have a rates bill, you know, this should not be an issue. You will be asked to supply your landlord or agent's details. In terms of accessing it then, you know, applications can be submitted online via the Department of Finance's website. If you have previously submitted a successful application and the localised restrictions are extended, which we hope they will be, you know, given the restrictions in place to the 5th of March, further payments will be issued automatically, so there's no need to reapply. If you think that you might be eligible for this after hearing today's webinar and you haven't applied previously, you can still apply for support from the 26th of December onwards, so 6 weeks until the 5th of February 2020. Some of the queries that we got in, some people feared that, you know, they were behind in the rates bill, would it be an issue, you know, with applying for the support, but the department have confirmed that this will not impact on the support available. And in terms of how the department is progressing in terms of applications, look, they've still confirmed that they're working on applications before 26th of December. So if you're still waiting, the guidance indicates that there's no need to reapply, or even if you have challenged a refusal, these 2 are still being worked to. Our advice is, you know, continue to check your emails, including your junk mail. Equally, if you do get support, however, not at the level you thought, you can email the department to clarify the position. They have outlined that for any urgent application queries, you can email, and the email address there is at the bottom of the slides. Just make sure that you quote your application reference as per your confirmation email when you completed your application. So just make things easier. And also note then, if you do receive a rejection and you feel that it's unfair, that you actually are eligible, you have 2 weeks to ask for the outcome to be reconsidered. Okay, so moving on to my next slide then. This is in relation to the COVID restrictions and business support scheme. So if you're not eligible for the localised restriction support scheme, and I would say, always go to that one first whenever you're going down through them. This scheme is being administered by Invest NI on behalf of the Department of the Economy. So the scheme, which is split into 2 parts, Part A and Part B, is in place to compensate businesses who have been forced to close or have been severely impacted as a result of the increased health regulations. So the first round of applications for Part A and B of the scheme, they did initially close on the 16th of December. However, the Minister, Diane Dodds, announced that the scheme would reopen from the 7th of January 2021. So just to look at Part A first then, Part A of the scheme is aimed at businesses required to close or cease trading under the health protection regulations, but who are not eligible for the localised restriction support scheme. So just to be clear, it's important to note that the guidance states there is a need to close, thus not just severely impacted in this case. So take, for example, businesses forced to suspend trading but who don't occupy business premises. In the tourism and hospitality sector, perhaps like the party bikes, or someone who doesn't occupy business premises, or close contact services, to be eligible, or businesses that are eligible for Part A will receive a grant of up to £600 per week for every week the restrictions are in place. And to be eligible, there are criteria which must be met. So the business needs to be named within the health protection regulations as being required to close, but is not eligible for the localised restriction support scheme. The business must be operating in Northern Ireland and trading on the 16th of October 2020, and you will have to demonstrate this as part of your application. So there will be certain items that you'll have to provide, to include like bank statements and things like that. The income lost as a result of the business having to close must be the main source of income, and that is, it must account of 50% or more of your total income. To support applications, the department have indicated that applications could be strengthened. It's not mandatory, but if you got a letter from your accountant indicating business existence, the trade that you carry out, the income lost, etc. And in terms of their progress then with applications, out of the applications submitted, which at the 28th of January was almost 5,000, 77% of those applicants have now received payment. There is a facility within the portal to check the progress of your application. So you can go into your portal, and I think it's click on applications and then on what's been submitted. So then in terms of Part B of the scheme, this is aimed at those who have not been forced to close, but are part of the supply chain, either directly or indirectly, to a business that has been forced to close under the regulations from Stormont. So Part B is divided into those who pay business rates and those who don't. For those paying rates, the grant will be determined based on the net annual value of the property. If the NAV is less than £15,000, the grant is £400 a week. For net annual values between 15,000 and 51, it's £600 per week. And then for those above the 51,000, the grant is £800 per week. For any businesses not paying rates, they will receive a grant of £300 if deemed eligible. So again, Part B, there's criteria to meet to be able to avail of the scheme. And that is that the business must supply goods or services to a business named in the health protection regulations. And note, if you are a food or drink producer, to avail of the scheme, you must be registered with your local council. You must be dependent on a business named in the regulations being open and fully operational. For example, a business that supplies services to wedding venues will be impacted given those venues are closed due to the restrictions in place, with weddings being cancelled. You must be able to confirm and give evidence that your turnover has reduced by 40%, and that income must be your main source of income. That is 50% or more. So to access, again, businesses who are eligible for the first round of this support do not need to reapply to the reopen scheme. They will automatically receive an additional payment to cover the extended period of the restrictions. For new applicants, eligibility can be assessed via Invest and I have an online eligibility questionnaire for both Parts A and Part B. So, for those of you who aren't sure if you're eligible or not, you can go on there and check that. And also note that the grants can be backdated. So once businesses are satisfied that they're eligible, they can submit their their applications electronically. Just note that the schemes are due to close tomorrow, the 5th of February. We have had no word yet, if they'll be extended, but there is a hope that they will be. Just remember that these are taxable grants, so don't forget to share them with your accountant or within your tax return. Okay, so before handing you back to Emer then, who's going to recap on loans available and also the latest on the business interruption insurance scheme, I'm going to quickly take you through the large tourism and hospitality business support scheme, which was announced there at the end of January. So the Department for the Economy launched this new support package for larger hospitality and tourism businesses which have been impacted by COVID-19. The scheme will provide financial support to help businesses meet their fixed costs and overhead obligations. To be eligible, your business must have a net annual value of greater than or equal to £51,001. So obviously that might exclude a lot of businesses, but for any that are above that. In addition, you must have been named within the health protection regulations. You must have been eligible for the localised restriction support scheme, and also you must have been operating in Northern Ireland before the 16th of October 2020. So it is a tiered scheme, and it comprises of like a one-off payment, and this payment will be based on weekly amounts of between 2,400 and 41,900 depending on the business's net annual value. So the lump sum grant will cover the period of 8 weeks to the 11th of December, plus a further 6 weeks from the 26th of December to the 5th of February. So in total, 14 weeks of support is available. So for example, businesses with a net annual value of between £51,001 to £60,000 will receive £2,400 per week. So that's £33,600 of a grant available. So yeah, as you can see, it's definitely worth looking into if you feel you're eligible. And this will increase by £500 per week for any businesses whose NAV increases. So like take for instance a business with an NAV of between £60,001 to £70,000, the weekly amount is £2,900, and this continues in that pattern by increasing by £500 increments up to businesses which have a net annual value of £600,000. So like take, for example, if you had a net annual value of just over £90,000, a grant of £60,600 would be available. For anyone with a net annual value of above £600,000, the bands widen out and increase at a rate of £2,500 per week. So for example, a business with a net annual value of between the £600,001 to £700,000 would be eligible for £31,900 per week, and that's a grant of just under £500,000. So in terms of accessing the grant, the department have outlined that they will contact eligible businesses by the end of February to provide an application form. They've identified, I believe, it's like 250 businesses who should be eligible for this support, and then they expect to issue the grants in March 21. So if you think you're eligible for this, do keep your eye out. So that's the 4 supports I wanted to focus on. I'll now pass you back to Emer, who's going to go through the final few slides then, and then we'll go to our Q&A. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Aoibhinn. So moving away from grants and moving on to loans now. Many of you will have heard of the various coronavirus loans which have been announced by the banks over the last year. So the two most common obviously being the bounce back loan and the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, which we refer to as CBILS. Both of these loans have very favourable rates, and therefore we've noticed clients applying for the loans to be able to support any ongoing projects as well that they have on. It's really worth taking advantage of the favourable rates that are attached to these. So for the bounce back loan, there are no repayments, fees or interest for the first 12 months, and the bounce back loan can be for sums of up to £50,000. And the interest rate is fixed at 2.5%. In terms of the CBILS then, there's no interest for 12 months, no security on borrowings up to £250,000. And what's really particularly good about the CBILS is the fact that it can be obtained through a term loan, asset finance, overdraft facilities or invoice finance facilities. So it's quite flexible. It's not just simply a traditional loan. You can really get the type of facility that meets your business's needs. Applications for both schemes close on the 31st of March 2021, and that's worth noting, just particularly in relation to the CBILS. The bounce back application process is quite quick, whereas the CBILS requires a bit more detail, so it's worth noting the closing date there if you would like to avail of that. And one of the questions that we've been asked by our clients who originally had applied and received the bounce back loan, they now are maybe considering the CBILS, and their first question is, well, if I have the bounce back loan, do I qualify or will I be eligible for the CBILS loan? And the answer is yes, you're not precluded from receiving CBILS, but the process there would be that you actually pay back the bounce back loan and then receive the CBILS for the amount that you require plus the amount that you had on the bounce back loan. So your overall loan is for the same amount, but it's just consolidated into the one CBILS loan. And then moving on to business interruption insurance. So this has received quite a lot of coverage in the media over the past few weeks, particularly. So business interruption insurance really covers a business for unexpected events and for a reduction in gross profits or revenues as a result of an unexpected event. And last year, when the pandemic began, businesses began to question whether coronavirus qualified as one of these unexpected events, and therefore they were covered under their business insurance policy. At the time, the insurance company's initial response to this was mainly to just issue a blanket refusal and to say that there was a lack of clarity, so there or precedence even, and therefore they wouldn't be compensating companies for the impact of coronavirus. And some other insurance companies, they deferred people's claims. So as a result of the confusion and the lack of clarity that there was around this, the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, brought a test case which included several large insurance companies who volunteered with several of their policies. And this test case ran through the High Court and concluded in autumn of last year, where the majority of policies examined were found to offer coverage for the impact of coronavirus. This was then challenged by the insurance companies, and it proceeded then through the Supreme Court. So in January, the Supreme Court ruled that the majority of policies that they examined did offer coverage for the coronavirus pandemic. So good news and a real potential lifeline for businesses, but it's really worth emphasising, though, that it was the majority of policies, not necessarily all of the policies that were examined that qualified for this, and also that it was purely a sample of policies examined in the first place. So it isn't necessarily a blanket finding across all business interruption policies, but it certainly is good and in the favour of the policyholder. So in terms of steps to take if you hold business interruption insurance, or if you suspect that you have coverage for this, the first step to take obviously is to check your policy. Quite often what we have found is that some policyholders, they hold a standard business buildings, contents and contents policy, and actually within that there is a business interruption clause. So do always look into that and check whether that's the case. You might have the insurance coverage and you're not even aware of it. And the key terminology to be looking out for there is the disease clause and the prevention of access clause. Those were the two specific clauses that the Supreme Court ruled on back in January. So the next step, if you're satisfied that you have BI insurance, is to speak to your insurance broker. And if you're still not satisfied that you're being refused, but you think you have a case, then certainly also seek legal advice. So in terms of our capacity as accountants, we're very well versed in looking at the monetary side of the claim and calculating the losses, but on the legal side and the terminology, it's really worth getting a second opinion from the likes of a solicitor for those instances. And some legal firms locally are actually offering a free service to review your business interruption policy for you to see whether you are covered. So certainly avail of that if you think that you are covered. Once you're satisfied that you have the coverage, the next step then would be to contact your insurer and state your intent to file the insurance claim. From our experience and our contacts with policyholders over the last few weeks, since the 15th of January, there seems to have been a real uptake in the amount of claims being processed, and therefore, as you would expect, a bit of a backlog there. So we would definitely recommend just being as proactive here as you can and lodging your claim as soon as possible to allow for some prompt payment. The next step then is the actual calculation of losses, and arguably the most complex aspect of it. So on a high level, it will be a case of comparing your revenues or gross profits based on a normal trading year with last year's revenue or gross profits. And that can be subjective. It can also lead to some complications around the timeline of the loss event. And from our experience, that's what's most commonly challenged then by the insurance provider. So our advice there would be that if you find that calculating your losses is complex or subjective, then the best thing to do is to seek advice from an accountant such as ourselves, who would then prepare a calculation of your losses. This would provide a robust loss statement, which you then provide to your insurance company, and it really puts you in the best footing in terms of your business interruption insurance claim. And in terms of other supports then, so you'll all be aware that the 5% VAT rate for hospitality was extended until the 31st of March 2021. Now, obviously at the minute, with the hospitality sector largely being closed, it's difficult to actually take advantage of that at present. There also is the option to defer VAT payments. So if you're met with a large VAT bill, you can opt in to defer this over 11 instalments, which is an excellent option in terms of if you're struggling from a cash flow perspective and you want to manage your cash flow, that's definitely a good option to avail of. In terms of rates then, there was the initial 4-month rates holiday, followed by the discretionary 12-month rates holiday for eligible businesses. There's also the Rates Hardship Fund, which is open to businesses in the tourism and hospitality sector specifically. So that has to be applied for separately, and information can be found for that on Land and Property Services website. There also are HMRC time to pay arrangements. So at the minute, HMRC are being pragmatic in the sense that they understand businesses might be faced with tax bills at the minute that they simply can't pay off immediately. So they are willing to introduce payment plans, and it's just a case of reaching out to HMRC and making your case there, and hopefully coming to a good resolution with them. And finally then, Tourism NI have a helpline which is set up between the hours of 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. It's on screen there should you need it, and they have a team set up ready to answer any of your specific tourism and hospitality sector queries. So that's very, very helpful as well. And as you'll see, we have a wide range of upcoming webinars over the next month or so. So this particular list is from the People's seminars and our webinars. And as you can see, a really wide range of topics with a range of contributors from various sectors, legal and accountancy. So definitely worth signing up to any of those webinars as well.
Thank you so much, Emer, and thanks also to Aoibhinn and Lesley Ann. Lots of really, really useful information there as always, and so much to take in. So just a reminder for all the industry joining us here today, as always, we'll be sharing a recording of today's session with you all, so you can review it again at your leisure. And as promised, I'll be sharing some of your questions with all of our experts shortly, and we'll also be joined at that stage by Claire McNaughton from Tourism NI, one of our other colleagues. Just before we get stuck into the questions, I'd just like to do a couple of very quick polls so we can get a feel for how useful you find today's session so far. So firstly, it should pop up on the screen there in a moment. How would you rate today's session in terms of content and relevance to your business? So that's on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not relevant at all and 5 being very or extremely relevant. I'll just give you guys a wee second to fill that in. Okay, and second, sorry, I've got ahead of myself there. The second poll is, do you plan to take any action within your business as a direct result of what you've heard from our presentations today? So that's just a very simple yes or no. It's a great help. Make sure we can tell that you're all still with us, and also just make sure that we're on the right track with all of our seminars at the moment. As I mentioned earlier, we'll also be issuing a short survey via email after the session. Your feedback is so useful. It means we can be sure we're delivering the topics that you guys need. So grateful if you can just take a few minutes to complete that whenever you have a moment. So now it's my great pleasure to welcome back Aoibhinn and Emer from PKF-FPM and Lesley Ann and Claire from Tourism NI for our Q&A session. Let everybody get a chance to get their cameras on. We've got a bit of girl power today. All the women. So thanks so much, everybody, for joining us. We've lots of questions today. Everyone's been paying attention. Everyone's been dropping their questions in. So I'm actually just going to start off, Lesley Ann, with you, if you don't mind. We've just got a couple of people who wanted to check when the certified bed and breakfast, guest house and guest accommodation support scheme actually closes. Could you remind us of how long people have to submit applications for that one?
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. It closes this Thursday, which is the 11th of February at 5 p.m. There's also a couple of questions in the chat about people who have applied but haven't received a confirmation email through. So yeah. If I could just ask anybody who's in that situation, if you just check your junk and your spam emails as well, in case they've gone in there. It can take a couple of hours for those confirmation emails to come through, so it'll just depend if you check back a little bit of time after you've completed the form. And if you're still having any issues with that, we have a dedicated support email address, which is accommodationssupport@tourismni.com. If you can drop us an email with your details, we can check the back end of the system and just make sure that your forms are on there and the details are all coming through okay.
That's absolutely super, Lesley. Thank you. I suppose that's it. Yes, don't just sit and wait in silence and assume nothing's come through. It could be in your junk mail. That happens to me all the time. So always worth checking in there as well. Thank you. Brilliant. So off to a good start here. We have some questions in just in relation to funding for self-catering. Aoibhinn, I'm wondering if you could pick up on this one. What funding would be available for anyone within the self-catering sector at this stage?
Okay, thanks, Patricia. Well, I suppose if you operate as a self-catering business, there is support available there from the localised restriction support scheme. So if your self-catering business is valued as a domestic property, as long as you're certified by Tourism NI, you can avail of £800 per week for each week of the restrictions. And then if you're rated on a commercial basis, you should be eligible for there's 3 different levels: £800 per week if your net annual value is less than 15,000. Then it moves up to the standard rate of £1,200 per week if your net annual value is between 15 and 51,000, and then £1,600 per week for each week of the restrictions if it's above the 51,000. So yeah, the localised restriction support scheme is definitely your first choice there.
Great, thank you so much. That's super, Evie. And in terms of someone who's planning to maybe make some changes to their business, is there any funding, Emer, I'll maybe come to you for this one, available for the likes of adding an ensuite, or maybe even grants for repairing old buildings or something along those lines?
Well, at the minute, in terms of capital grants, there aren't any available. But in the middle of last year, there were a few smaller capital grants available for those types of works, and they were mostly administered by councils, local councils, or the Department of Communities as well. So it's worth keeping an eye out to see whether any of those schemes come back around again. It's quite possible. In addition to that, probably the best option at the minute is the likes of the bounce back loan or the CBILS loan for a higher amount. So I know that in the presentation I've just highlighted the advantages of the bounce back loan, but if you needed capital to be able to do renovation work at the minute, the bounce back loan provides a great option because you get your funding quite quickly. It's quite a straightforward application process with really low interest rates, no repayments for a year. So a lot of advantages there if you need to secure the cash quickly for a project like that. Yeah.
That's absolutely great. Thank you so much, Emer. Evie, I think we'll swing back over to you here. We've got quite a few queries through on LRSS, so I'll maybe just run through those with you. The first one is someone who's received support from LRSS, and they're just wondering, will that be extended then to the 5th of March now?
Yeah, so just there on Friday evening, I think it was, there was an announcement that, the support will be extended for a further 4 weeks to the 5th of March. And also, for anyone who's interested, the coronavirus, the CRBSS, Part A and Part B, those schemes have also been extended. You don't need to reapply. Eligible businesses will automatically, receive that support. So keep an eye out for that email confirmation of when you should expect payment.
Great. And I suppose, yes, that leads on to someone was wondering, how long would you have to wait for payment under the RLSS scheme? So this person maybe applied towards the end of last year, so they're just wondering what the timescales are likely to be.
Yeah, so the department confirmed they're still working on applications that were made before the 26th of December. So if you're still waiting, the guidance, does stipulate there's no need to reapply, or equally, if you're challenging a decision maybe that wasn't favourable, they're still working through those. Continue to check your emails, your junk mail especially, just in case of your spam. And then if your query is really urgent, there is an email there that you can contact the department on. It was within the presentation. It's localised.restrictions@finance-ni.gov.uk. So, but obviously they're inundated, with queries. So it's only if it is urgent, to use that.
Okay. We've got someone here who has a bed and breakfast, and they're wondering, can they claim under the LRSS scheme?
Yeah. So the LRSS does have provisions for B&Bs, even if they are domestically rated. B&Bs were forced to close. So if you're domestically rated and you've got certification from TNI, then yes, you should be able to look to the localised restriction support scheme. And if you haven't applied before, you can still receive support from the 26th of December onwards.
Okay, so it can be backdated then. Actually, that's wonderful. And there's another person sticking on this same scheme. Evie, is there a limitation if you have another business? So as a result, the tourism business contributes to less than 50% of your income. I think in this case it's maybe around 25%.
Okay, well, the guidance doesn't stipulate that there's any income percentage, like as with the Part A and Part B of the CRBSS. So, but it does stipulate that you can only get this support if you've been instructed to close or severely limit, your operations under the regulations. I suppose the most important thing is that you occupy business premises, or for those exceptions like the hotels, the B&Bs, the self-catering, if you're domestically rated, that you have that TNI certification, then you should be able to apply.
That's great news. Absolutely super. Thank you so much, Aoibhinn.
problem.
I'll give you a wee rest for a second. Emer, I think I'm going to swing back over to you here. We've got a question about insurance. Someone wondering about the business interruption insurance. Is there any advice available on that at all?
There certainly is. So I suppose in my presentation I've outlined the two areas where advice is probably most needed, and that's the legal wording and then the calculation of the losses. So for legal wording advice, first and foremost, speak to your solicitor, obviously, but I have become aware in the last week or two of Hospitality Ulster offering free consultations with a legal expert for any of their members. So, and I've spoken to a few businesses who have availed of that. So they have received legal advice as a result of their Hospitality Ulster membership. So do look into that if you're a member. Likewise, if you're a member of any other sort of federations like that, check whether that's a service that they're offering at the minute. And that's mainly a legal service to check the wording of your policy. And then secondly, if you need help around calculating your losses, it would be a case of speaking to an accountant such as myself, reaching out to me, and I can certainly give a few pointers to begin with. I'm more than happy to help if you're struggling with actually quantifying the losses.
That's great, Emer, thank you so much. And also, we have a question from a sole trader who has another side job. So is there any funding that a sole trader with another side job can avail of?
So there are several options there, and I suppose at the minute we don't know an awful lot about this sole trader's business or their side job as well. But first and foremost, I would say that the localised restriction scheme that Aoibhinn has mentioned, and she's gone into detail there about the eligibility for it. And if you're not eligible for it, then certainly looking into the CRBSS Part B scheme. And checking whether you can avail of that under the business too. The second sort of group of options that are available might then be the self-employed supports for that individual. So the important thing to consider with the self-employed supports is whether that individual's income, 50% of their income comes from self-employed work. So if that's not the case, then unfortunately they won't qualify for the likes of the self-employed scheme or the newly self-employed scheme. But if their work from their self-employed job accounts for 50% more, then they should apply for those as well. The newly self-employed scheme has actually just been extended now until the 19th of February, which is good news too. So all in all, I think there are four options to look at: two for the business, the LRSS and the CRBSS, and then two from a self-employed side of things where he's a sole trade, so he should see whether he's also eligible for those, and it's quite likely he hopefully would secure at least one of those options.
That's super, thank you so much. Aoibhinn, I'm just going to come back to you here. We've got a question here about funding and grants that might be available for tour guides. Is there anything at all for tour guides that you could recommend?
Okay, Patricia, so tour guides, they weren't specifically noted within the regulations as a business which were forced to close, but obviously have been impacted. I would suggest you perhaps look at Part B of the coronavirus restrictions business support scheme. So just to recap, to be able to avail of that scheme, you must supply goods or services to a business named in the health protection regulations, and you must be dependent on them being open and fully operational. I suppose the most important thing is, can you confirm that your turnover is down 40% and the income lost must be your main source of income, so 50% or more. So what we're finding is most tour operators maybe have another job and it just don't fit that criteria, but if you do, then look at Part B and hopefully you'll get support through that then.
Okay, thank you. And Aoibhinn, in terms of golf clubs, we've had a question in from a golf club wondering what support might be available for them. Can you give any advice on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, the golf clubs, the latest regulations, which were mid-January, there specifically note that outdoor sports and exercise facilities should be able to apply to the localised, the LRSS. So on that basis, if I was a golf club, I would look to that support. Previously, they would have been excluded, but have a look and see if you can apply to that. If you have been previously excluded, there might be grounds for you to apply now, and if so, you should be able to get support then from the 26th of December onwards.
Okay, so just worth checking back then again. That's absolutely super. Thanks so much, Aoibhinn. Emer, I have one more for you here, if you don't mind. It's someone from the point of view of wet pubs who've obviously been having a bit of a difficult time. Is there anything in terms of funding for those guys that they could avail of?
Yeah, so well, hopefully they have received communication for their wet pub scheme, and that's underway, but I'm aware that at the minute those wet pub grant scheme payments haven't actually been issued yet, so perhaps that person is waiting on that. From guidance that I've read online, there's no confirmed date for when payment should be, but by now they have contacted all eligible pubs, so hopefully it's being processed as we speak, and payment should hopefully come out soon for that. Then in addition to that, as a wet pub, they should also be eligible for the localised restriction scheme. So again, perhaps maybe they haven't received it yet, but they should hopefully have an application in. And as Aoibhinn says, you know, the department are currently dealing with quite a big backlog of applications for this particular scheme. So I would just emphasise that as long as they've got their applications in for both the wet pub and the localised restriction scheme, it's just important to be checking emails and spam folders, as we've said, because things can slip through the net. And hopefully they should be getting assistance soon for both of those.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Emer. We've so much to think about there, and goodness, I'm sure everybody's brains are absolutely full. I suppose a reminder to everybody that we will be sharing a recording of today's session, so you can watch this again. And I think Aoibhinn and Emer also, we could maybe do like a little Word copy of some of the FAQs or the common questions that have come up today, so that people can kind of read it back in writing. And you know, I think sometimes when you sort of see it on a page, because there's so much to take in when we're listening to you, you're just fonts of knowledge here today. So that's been absolutely super. As I mentioned at the start, we're also going to be offering a limited number of short one-to-one follow-up calls with our expert speakers from today. So the guys are very kindly giving up of their time. So these are open to anyone from the tourism and hospitality business based in Northern Ireland. So they take kind of the form of maybe a 15 to 20 minute chat with one of our experts about maybe a specific question that you might have for your business. And it can just be a really good opportunity. You know, obviously in this public forum, all of our answers are quite general, and we don't know your specific situation, so it's really useful. If you would like to request a one-to-one chat with one of the team on any area of what we've covered today, can you drop your name, company and your question along with a contact telephone number to me, Patricia, at the email address that you should see on the screen there. So it's industry.development@tourismni.com. We do have limited capacity for these, so can't guarantee a callback, but we always do our very best to accommodate as many of you as possible, and we'll continue to do that for this topic. I know it's a bit of a hot topic as always. By emailing me, you will be given permission for your contact details to be shared with our experts, but the only reason your details will only be used for that purpose, and they won't be retained for any other reason. So your details are secure. Also, just a reminder, if you head to covid19.tourismni.com and click on the support centre, you'll find recordings and other support materials from all of our TED webinars that we've delivered so far back since March. So they're on the previous webinars tab, and we'll aim to get the recording from today up online as soon as we possibly can. We also, I know Emer mentioned there as well, some of our upcoming TED webinars. We have a people series currently open for registrations, which is going to be really useful, all in the context of our people, looking at culture and team, exploring COVID-19 and Brexit, all looking at that in relation to our people. We're also going to be delivering some sales focused webinars, one of them is happening later this week, and then also another one early next week. So if that's of interest and you haven't seen those yet, be sure to check on covid19.tourismni.com, head to support centre and upcoming webinars, and you'll see everything there that's currently available to register for. So we're releasing new TED dates all the time, so do keep an eye on the website and make sure you're on our mailing list to find out first about any of the upcoming opportunities that we have. We won't spam you, we'll just keep you up to date on the things that we think are relevant for you guys. So I'm just having a look. I don't see any other specific questions there. I think we've covered we've covered, you know, you may have a question that you've submitted, but it maybe we haven't answered that question directly, but I think we've tried to cover the broad range of the general topics that people have been asking for. So if you feel like you've still got a question, do drop me an email, and we'll try and get you a wee one-to-one follow-up on those. But hopefully a lot of your questions have been answered today. And thank you so much to Lesley Ann and Aoibhinn, Emer and Claire once again. Loads of valuable insights today. Thanks to everyone who's joined us this morning. We had fantastic numbers this morning, so I look forward to welcoming some of you to some more of our upcoming sessions as well. So thank you so much, ladies. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.